What up, African world? It's Home Team here, and I'm back at it with another video of African history, culture, and worldview. I wanted to start a new series where I pick a time period and speak on significant events in African history and briefly explain what was going on in the rest of the world. I'll simply call this series Africa and the World. Unfortunately, Africans historically have been seen as backward bushmen with little to no statehood or viable civilization, and so their presence and contributions to world history get excluded from historical dialogue. Hopefully today, I can help change that. And as always, if you want to support the home team, you can do so on patreon.com. I have some new awards for you guys, so be sure to check that out. Also, go to Afrographics.com, a website where you can find unique illustrative infographics summarizing African history. All links to Patreon, Afrographics, and home team merchandise are in the description box below. We oftentimes hear about significant events in world history in school or in popular culture, and these events become etched in our memory banks. But unfortunately, because of the denigration of African history, we tend to know nothing about what was going on in Africa during the same periods, leaving us heavily reliant on the dark continent trope perpetuated by Europeans. So this video is intended to reorient ourselves as Afro-descendant people and give Africa its proper place on the world stage. Today, we'll focus on the 14th century. By doing this, I think it'll paint a good picture for us and really help us gain a better understanding of African history and improve proper historical perspectives. For this series, we're mostly going to be focusing on the Africans below the Sahara, as their history is often omitted, but we'll briefly touch on North Africa as well. Keep in mind that there are many significant events during the 14th century all across the world, and I certainly can't name them all, so please feel free to leave a comment and let's continue the conversation. So what was going on in Africa in the 14th century? One of the primary events in the 14th century occurred in West Africa during the reign of Mansa Musa of the Mali Empire. But before we get into that, let's discuss a little known event that happened before Mansa Musa. King Abubakar Keita II was on the throne, and according to Malayan accounts, he abdicated his throne in the 14th century to, quote, explore the limits of the ocean. In other words, Abubakar Keita, the Mansa, went and explored the Atlantic Ocean to find new land. This was significant because the Mandinka were the first recorded West Africans to do so, and this was a whole century before the more popular journey of Columbus. Now, after his abdication, Mansa Musa came to the throne, and his exploits made him one of the most popular kings and wealthiest king in human history. Under his reign, the Mali Empire and the legendary city of Timbuktu entered its golden age, solidifying the legacy of Mali. In East Africa during the 14th century, by this time the Abyssinian Empire in Ethiopia was beginning to make some structural changes to its regency. The power of the Negusa Nagast, or the King of Kings, was nearly unlimited, and everyone wanted to rule as a great descendant of the Queen of Sheba. Thus, all males who traced their lineage could lay claim to the throne. This caused a lot of turmoil beginning in the 14th century Ethiopia, as many Ethiopian rulers could not sit comfortably on the throne, and so a decree was made to keep all male family members with legitimate claims to the throne in a royal mountaintop prison, in which they would be guarded and cared for by soldiers and servants loyal to the king. Moving down to the eastern African coast, the legendary Swahili city-state of Kilwa began to come into its own and flourish during this period. Kilwa slowly grew into the most prominent city of the eastern African coast. Kilwa's architecture began to be presented on the world stage, as the Swahili built many structures, centers of worship, and houses. They even began to mint their own coins and started importing goods from Persia and China. This Swahili city-state experienced its most lustrous age. Now heading back to West Africa and Nigeria, one of the grandest achievements of Africans in metallurgy experienced its golden age in the 14th century at Ile-Ife. Ile-Ife had reached its peak as the dominant city of the Yoruba people during this time. In this period, the artists at Ile-Ife perfected and refined the naturalistic sculptural tradition in terracotta, stone, copper, brass, and bronze, and this achievement stunned the world. Even though the Yoruba were creating these works of art centuries before, their metallurgic genius at Ile-Ife reached its zenith in the 14th century. In the mid-14th century, the Great Benin Kingdom in southwestern Nigeria saw some brief trouble as Oba Ohen was stoned to death because he killed his second-in-command for discovering he was paralyzed. The latter end of the 14th century, during the reign of Oba Okbeka, Benin saw the advent of several civil wars. This was a rare moment in the Benin Kingdom because after the 14th century, Benin entered a golden age under the Ogidigan Oba Awari. In North Africa during this time, the Mamluk Sultanate made Cairo its capital, and under the Mamluks, the city prospered. By about 1340, not only had Cairo's population improved to about 500,000 inhabitants, making it the largest city on 3 continents, but as the home of Al-Azhar University, it also became the main seat of learning in the Islamic world. It was also well positioned to profit from the spice trade from Asia to the Mediterranean. Another key event in the 14th century happened in the Kanem Empire. The Kanem Empire was the longest lasting empire in African history, but in the 14th century, they had a war against the Bulala that fragmented the empire, forcing the Safawa dynasty to move to Nigeria and form the Brunei Empire. Ironically, this increased the influence of Kanem as they later regained their original capital and kept their power and influence in northeast Nigeria. And finally, during the latter end of the 14th century in Central Africa, the Congo Empire begins to take form. 2 rulers agreed to join their kingdoms together in the late 14th century. The son of Nimi Nzima, Lukeni Nimi, became the first of Congo to declare Mbanza Congo the kingdom's capital, and this event began the grand legacy of the Congo state. Now that we've highlighted a few significant events in Africa, let's briefly highlight what was going on in the rest of the world during this time to give us a proper world perspective. In Europe and in Asia, the Ottoman Empire is just now beginning to form as they begin their early expansion into the Balkans. The so-called 100 Years' War begins when Edward III lays claim to the throne of France, and this starts a series of conflicts between England and France. Edward III defeats the French army, which was a significant event in the period. One of the most devastating events, however, in world history happened in Europe during this time as well. The Black Death was said to have killed up to 60% of the European population. Some scholars consider the 14th century as part of the Dark Ages of Europe. The Mongol Empire, perhaps the largest empire in human history, reaches its peak of power and influence. They were no doubt one of the most feared militaries in human history. Tamerlane, the Central Asian warlord and founder of the Timurid dynasty, came to the throne and became a dominant figure in world history, his army becoming world-renowned. And finally, in Central America, the 14th century saw the rise of the Aztec people and their city-states. Aztec culture began to be one of the most dominant in Central America. During this time, the city of Tenochtitlan was founded, and later, at its peak, it became an absolute marvel to the Spanish upon their arrival. Hopefully this gives you guys a better picture of the world and Africa's place in it. The 14th century was a pretty interesting part of world history because it was the last century before humans began to interact with each other on a more global level. It was one of the few moments in history where we see civilizations nearly in its purest form. It was a classical period for many people, and African civilization is no doubt a part of that legacy. Well, I'm all out, guys. Let me know if you liked this video and would like more. If you'd like to support the home team, you can do so on patreon.com. The link is in the description box below. Know thyself. Remember your ancestors. Peace.